For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. And here is my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work, so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality. As it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he is coming to you with much enthusiasm and on his own initiative. And we are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service to the gospel. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany us as we carry the offering, which we administer in order to honor the Lord himself and to show our eagerness to help. We want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this liberal gift, for we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of man. In addition, we are sending with them our brother, who has often proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and fellow worker among you. As for our brothers, they are representatives of the churches and an honor to Christ. Therefore, show these men the proof of your love and the reason for our pride in you, so that the churches can see it. There is no need for me to write to you about this service to the Lord's people, for I know your eagerness to help, and I have been boasting about it to the Macedonians, telling them that since last year you in Achaia were ready to give, and your enthusiasm has stirred most of them to action. But I am sending the brothers in order that our boasting about you in this matter should not prove hollow, but that you may be ready, as I said you would be. For if any Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, we, not to say anything about you, would be ashamed of having been so confident. So I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to visit you in advance and finish the arrangements for the generous gift you had promised. Then it will be ready as a generous gift, not as one grudgingly given. This is the word of the Lord.
We're talking today, and in this little series, because we've reached the right part of Corinthians, we're talking about money and finance and giving. And if you think about it, money is part of everyday life, isn't it? It's how a lot of things get done. It's something we use, we talk about, we hear about in adverts, on the news. We watch out for what the government's going to do next. It's how a lot of the world operates. But we don't discuss it that much at church. And there's a good reason for that, because we want to focus most of all on the God who works in our lives by grace. God gives us free, undeserved favor. We can't earn that from him. We don't pay it back to him. The blessings of the gospel are paid for in full by Jesus. That's the big headline of the Christian faith. And that's why we read again the first verse that we started with, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. We tried to learn some of it as a memory verse last week. You know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. That's the foundation of our relationship with God, his grace, his undeserved kindness. that Jesus gave up the riches of heaven, came down into the poverty of our world, and then took the utter bankruptcy of your sin and mine and the sin of the whole world and paid for it in full when he died on the cross. So that everyone who puts their faith in him might receive the riches of a relationship with God that will last forever. That's the gospel. That's the God of the universe who is astonishingly generous. He works in our lives by grace. And when we begin to grasp that, it unlocks our hearts, first of all, to put our faith in him, and then to respond to him in the whole of our lives, to worship him, to follow him in every area, including money. And so it's really important to as we talk about money, as we talk about giving, to kind of keep that in the center, that it's all a response to God's grace. It's not about sort of trying to work our way into God's good books. It's not simply kind of trying to do some kind of religious duty. It's a heart response to God's generosity. The specific background in the letter we've just been reading from, Corinthians, was a collection being put together by Paul and the group with him, because there was a famine and persecution for the Christians back in Jerusalem, and it meant that they were in desperate need. And so what Paul does is he gets to work with these new churches that God has brought into being in places like Corinth and places like areas like Macedonia. And he says, well, listen, you've enjoyed spiritual blessings that have emanated out of, that have come from the gospel. Can you help Christian brothers and sisters back in Jerusalem? Let's get a collection together to do that. And if you look over the page, verse 13 and 14, you see his agenda, his vision as he does that. He talks about Christians in one place, realizing their family with Christians in another place, helping and sharing so that there is equality. It's really striking the way that word is used. It stands out, doesn't it? It's like any family, isn't it? That there should be equality in the way that the children are taught, looked after and treated. That's the goal, that's the aim, that everyone has an equal share, an equal value. And he quotes from Exodus, the fact that God provided for the people back in the wilderness. And he's saying, as he sees the Christian church as it's spreading across the world of his day, he's saying, God is still providing for the church. It's just that some people in one part might have more, and they can help people who are struggling in another place. So God is providing for the church, for his people, through the wider Christian family. So that's his vision. And I was thinking about this. We sometimes do spontaneous collections, don't we? When there's been some catastrophe, some tragedy, we will respond with heart and with action because we want to say, yes, we can help at this moment in time. Week to week, month to month, giving to St. Helens covers the costs of being church, actually. By the way, if you didn't know, the costs of individual churches in the Church of England isn't covered by the government. It isn't covered by a sort of central budget in the Church of England. It's covered by each church. And we give to the Central Church of England. And so we're part of this picture of God provides for his whole family through individuals, through churches, and then us thinking about, well, where should those resources go once we know what God has provided? So that's where all this is coming from, and there's a lot to talk about there, I think, already before we get into some just practical things. Let's stay over coffee. Let's talk about money this week and next week as we're kind of having a little opportunity to focus on it. Let's think out loud together. But to land on this week, in all those sort of details that Peter read us through so well, I want to draw out three principles that Paul has for the Corinthians back then. Three principles to do with Christian giving, to do with how we go about it, to learn from the way Paul went about the collection back then. First one is that Christians give proportionately. Christians give proportionately. The mindset is that God gives us all that we have. It all comes from him, it all belongs to him, and we get to steward it. And so you and I, we get to steward what God's given to us. And so we say, okay, Lord, how do I use it? It's all yours. It's all my responsibility for how it gets used. But let me specifically put aside some for your service, for your gospel spread, for worshipping you. And the encouragement is to do that in a way that's proportionate, a percentage, a fraction, an amount that's in keeping with. So let me read from verse 10. Here is my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give, but also have the desire to give. Do so. Now finish the work so that your willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it. And then this is the phrase, right at the end of verse 11, according to your means. In other words, give according to what you can give. In proportion, a percentage, a fraction, whatever amount God gives you. The same principle in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. Paul seems to be talking about the same collection. And he says to the Corinthians in that letter, on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money, and again hear this phrase, in keeping with your income. And then he's got this big collection in mind, so he says, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give you letters of introduction to the men you approve and send the gift to Jerusalem. I tried to highlight the phrase again, in keeping with your income. It's about being proportionate. Some months, some seasons will have more, some will have less. But if you set aside proportion, then as God gives you more, you can give more away. If God leads you through tough circumstances, you'll give the same proportion, but it will be a smaller amount. So, okay, that's a clear enough principle. But how much? What proportion? Ultimately, that's for you to decide. It's between you and me and God. Each of us, not you and me, but me and God, you and God. It's a response that each of us makes to him. It's about our hearts. There's no rule anywhere in the New Testament. Just this principle that we started with, that we give in response to God's generosity to us. Now, obviously, Christians have looked at the patterns established in the Old Testament. They're not binding, but they are an example. A couple of things from the Old Testament patterns. The first is the principle of first fruits. The first part of each harvest, when they brought it in, the first fruits were given over to God. And there's something in that principle, isn't there, in giving, that we give as a first response to God's grace to us, rather than as a sort of afterthought that we kind of get round to. One of the unexpected benefits of going to electronic giving for many of us, and also a box at the back, is fewer buttons for the counting team to count. Because what would happen when the collection plate was passed round is that some people, on a semi-regular basis, would think, oh gosh, I'd forgotten about this. Put your hand in your pocket, get any loose change, and put it in the collection plate. And anything else that's in your pocket, including buttons and little sort of lids from biros and all that sort of thing. So because we don't do that at the moment, then the accounting team don't have to process lots of buttons. But the reason for describing that is, can you see that sort of, oh gosh, response to the opportunity of giving? We can do better than that, can't we? That's a kind of afterthought, a last-minute thing. But actually, what we can learn if we look at the way the Old Testament taught the people of God is to do it as an intentional thing, a first fruits thing, a response to God's goodness to us. The second principle in the Old Testament is tithing. A tithe was 10% given by all the Israelites so that they could be a nation worshipping God. But actually, it was more than 10% apparently, because there were various feasts and festivals that they were also required to keep, sacrifices required by the law. Someone's calculated that it was nearer to 23% of their income that people were required to give, although they didn't also have to pay income tax and VAT and all the rest of it. Again, we're not talking about what proportion, we're talking about setting a proportion though. And actually, a legacy of that kind of thinking is still present in quite a number of European countries, apparently. I looked it up. There's still quite a lot of European countries where they have a church tax. And it's sort of 1% or 2% of people's income. You can opt out of it often, but many people, even if they don't go to church, stay opted into it. And all of that system was, again, trying to be a nation worshipping God. New Testament, there's no law, there's not a tax. It's a response to God. But I think we can learn something about those principles of doing it as a first fruits thing, doing it as a setting a proportion and just trusting God and going for it. And the key is the very final verse that Peter read, chapter 9, verse 5. Paul comes back to this theme of generosity, and he talks about our giving. The key thing is it's a generous giving, not a grudging giving. So I'd encourage us to apply this to ourselves, to pray about it, think about it, and decide a proportion, a percentage. If you get a pay rise anytime, a bonus, then you've got an opportunity to use that percentage with that pay rise or that bonus. If the Chancellor puts up income tax next month, as might happen, or our pay goes down, then we can say with a free conscience, we don't worry about it, we just say, no, the Lord has made my income shrink, and so my giving has to reflect that. And we do that trusting that God will give us enough, and God will give the church enough too. That's proportionate giving, according to my means, in keeping with my income. Hopefully that makes sense. If this is an area of discipleship that you've not thought about for a while, then will you take the chance this week, next week, to have a think about it, have a pray about it, and to consider that, what should the proportion be for me? Lord, what are you calling to me to in this season? And I've changed the proportion in different seasons, but I learnt the principle as a child, actually, and have been doing something like this throughout my life, since studentdom into work and so on. And obviously, I've been able to give more as I've been paid more. And I found it really helpful to have that kind of discipline, if you like, of giving. And sometimes it's been really joyful and generous and loved it. Other times it has been more of a duty, and so I pray that it might be more joy. But I've still found it helpful, even in the times of duty, just to say, okay, this has helped me in my relationship with money, because I'm regularly giving to God's work to try and glorifying Him. I'm not worrying too much about money. I'm planning, I'm saving, I'm thinking about it. But ultimately, I know my future depends on God. I'm in His hands. It's not about my brilliant financial planning, ultimately. So that's the first principle. Christians give proportionately. And the second thing is, Christians give collectively. We're in this together. We know in the church in Corinth there were some really rich people, some sort of had big houses, other people who were poor. They were servants in those houses, slaves even in that culture. No individuals are named in this grand giving project that Paul is organising. There are no special donors who get a brass plaque, because we give collectively. And Paul is strengthening that here by making the churches aware of what each other are doing. He doesn't name individuals, but he does. He tells in chapter 8, verse 1, he tells the Corinthians what the Macedonians were doing, and you may have noticed it in chapter 9, verse 2, he told the Macedonians what the Corinthians are doing. And he's saying, listen, we're all in this together. And we all face the same spiritual danger of money being too important in our lives. So let's be a community about this. Let's encourage each other to live wholeheartedly and to get involved in this grace of giving in response to God's grace for us. So That's the picture, is doing it all together. And let me try and make that practical. If you've been to one of our church annual meetings and seen the annual report, it's also on the Charity Commission website if you ever want to look it up. You'll notice, for example, that the bill for the utilities is 5 figures. And you just think, gosh, that's a big number, isn't it? And you think, gosh, what can my giving do when we've got a 5-figure utility bill? And the temptation, and I feel this, is, my gift isn't really big enough. It's not, I won't bother. Or it's not really worth it. It's not doing anything. But collectively, as we all give together, then our collective giving is more than enough to pay the gas and electricity and water. It doesn't pay all our costs, our giving, but it pays all the sort of running costs and some of the ministry costs. And it would be great to see that continue to grow as we grow as a church. So we give collectively. And also, as a church, we give away collectively. And we do use the sort of Old Testament 10% as the amount. And so when you give to St. Helens, 10% of what you give is then given away to mission agencies like London City Mission, who we're partnering with at the moment, to some of the projects overseas, some of those who have been with us. And so, for example, Augustine, who is with us as a Cornhill student and is still studying with Cornhill, we've been helping him with some of his airfares to come over and continue to study. And that's just an example of how we want to say, okay, God's given us as a church the amount that we've given. He's given us this to steward, and we want to model as a church what we would need to do as individuals to give in response to what God has given. And so we seek to do that in partnership with others. I know of one church in a wealthy area of London, and they really prayed this through, and they thought, do you know what? One of the things we can do as a church is we can give money to lots of people. And so they set it as 50%. 50% of all that was given to that church was then given away to mission agencies, to UK, to overseas, to further the work of God in the world. I think it's a great vision for a church in a wealthy area. It means that we're giving collectively and we're giving away collectively to bless people, to serve the poor, to give to God's work in the world. Christians give proportionately, collectively, and finally, I was trying to think of all the details here. Christians get organised. There's a lot of detail, isn't there? And I think the example of the Corinthians and the Macedonians is helpful, because the Corinthians were enthusiasts. Paul talks in chapter 8, verse 11 about their eager willingness, and in chapter 9, verse 2, their eagerness to help. The bit I read, verse 10, they were the first to start collecting for the poor. Their zeal had then inspired the Macedonians to get involved. But, and this is the thing about why he's writing in such detail, verse 11, they need to finish the work. They're really enthusiastic, but they needed to get organised, and Paul's giving them the details. There's reliable people being found to manage the money and to take the collection to Jerusalem. And that's exactly the same principle, isn't it, that we want to say in any organisation, but particularly in the church. We find people of character, people who are trustworthy, and we get organised. I don't know how spiritual that sounds, getting organised, but being spiritual and being practical, they aren't opposites. You know, all the good intentions in the world, in the world, on their own, just good intentions, they're not going to help anybody, are they? We need to get organised as well. We need to use our heads as well as our hearts, as well as being inspired. And so for us as a church, one of the ways that we do that is that there's a scheme where people can, if you give using cash or cheque, you can get an envelope and put your envelope in, and there's a sort of envelope per Sunday, and that's one way of getting organised. Other people use online, which is what I was meaning by electronic giving. And there should be one of these near you, and that has more of the details on it. It's the front page is about our Thanksgiving gift day coming up at the start of November, And the back is about our regular giving, about how one might go about it is if one is part of this church. If you consider this to be your home church and want to give to God's work by giving to St. Helens, then there's details here. And it's an opportunity this time of year when we have our gift day just to review both the year past in terms of thanksgiving and also our regular giving, as I did yesterday in preparation for this sermon, and actually acted on it. I not only thought about it, but I acted on it. There's an evangelist called Alan Redpath who wrote a book called The Royal Route to Heaven. Sounds like a great title for a book. He told a story in it of a Christian complaining to a friend. Our church costs too much. They're always asking for money. The friend replied like this. Some time ago, a little boy was born into our home, and he cost us a lot of money. From the very beginning, he had a big appetite. He needed clothes, medicine, toys, even a puppy. He then went to school, and that cost us a lot more. Later, he went to college. Then he began dating, and that cost a small fortune. But in his last year at college, he had an accident, and he died. And since then, he hasn't cost us a penny. Which situation do you think we'd rather have? And of course, there was a stunned silence. After a significant pause, the friend continued, as long as the church lives, it will cost. If it dies, it won't cost anything. A living church has the most vital message for the world today. Therefore, I'm going to give and pray with everything I have to help to keep our church a living church. It's a high-impact story, but it makes the point, doesn't it? That actually our giving is part of our response to God's grace, part of serving him and worshipping him in the world. And practically speaking, we've seen today, we can do that as we give proportionately, as we give collectively, and as we get organised and do it in a thought-out and planned way.